Welcome to the Matt Bernier Show.
Welcome in to the Matt Bernier Show on DRF Live, Friday, April the 29th, 2016. We are 7 days away from the Kentucky Oaks. We're 8 days away from the first Saturday in May. The Run for the Roses, the Kentucky Derby. I'm Matt Bernier. You can follow me on Twitter at Bernier_Matt. I think we've got a fun show lined up for you today. We'll talk to Churchill Downs track announcer Travis Stone. He is the voice of the Kentucky Derby. You've also heard him over the winter up at Aqueduct calling races for the New York Racing Association. Tomorrow night is opening night at Churchill Downs. We'll talk to him a little bit about Derby contenders. We'll dive into the Kentucky Oaks a little bit as well and see what Travis has to say about everything. But before we dive into that, let's kind of kick things off with a story that, for me, I think the vast majority of people that are watching this or that are interested in everything that we do here at the Daily Racing Forum, one, you love horse racing. Two, you probably love to gamble. And three, I would say the majority are legitimate sports fans. And I think the story, the moment of the year has already happened. The one individual moment of the year from a sporting standpoint has happened. Chris Jenkins hitting the shot at the end of regulation at the buzzer to win the national championship for Villanova. That's going to be the moment of the year. It's kind of hard to top that from an individual one sort of play, one race, whatever you want to call it. It's going to be tough. That's probably the moment of the year already, sealed up. The story of the year, though, may actually happen Sunday morning, and it's going to happen at 9:05 on the East Coast here on NBC Sports Network. There's a team over in Europe, in England, called Leicester City, and they play in the Premier League. And you're probably already wondering what we're doing here. Leicester City coming into the year, let's start back last year. They were in the bottom three of the table, the standings, however you want to call it, again, using English terms compared to what we call it over here. They were in the bottom three, and the bottom three, as far as the Premier League is concerned, they get relegated. They get sent down to the league just below them. That would be the equivalent of, let's just use the team right now, the Philadelphia Phillies or the Atlanta Braves. They're playing terrible baseball. If they finish in the bottom two or the bottom three, they get relegated to AAA, and the champion and the runner-up of the AAA seasons, whether it's the International League or whatever you want to call it, Pacific Coast League, they both move up. They get promoted to the major leagues. Obviously, it doesn't work like that here, but that's what goes on over in Europe and over in the Premier League, particularly in England. So Leicester City last year was dead set. They were going to end up getting relegated. And somehow they went on a miraculous run, and they avoided it. They got to stay in the Premier League, at the top league in England. And coming into this year, bookmakers over there had pegged them as 5,000 to 1 long shots to win the Premier League. Now, again, this is where we're starting to bring it all together. Wagering and whatnot, sports. 5,000 to 1 to win the Premier League. Now, again, you've got big names over there. You've got Manchester United, you have Liverpool, you have Arsenal, you have Manchester City. You've got a lot of big names. And the analogy here, I'll tie in our horse racing, bringing us toward the Kentucky Derby next Saturday. You've got your Bafferts, you've got your Pletchers, you've got your Kieran McLaughlins, you've got your Chad Browns. And then you've got some names that are a little bit, let's say, less mainstream, less well-known. Whether it's a Cliff Sice, or it's the connections from the Japanese invader, Lonnie, or it's Trojan Nation and Paddy Gallagher, a maiden. You've got some lesser-known outfits going into the Kentucky Derby. You've got all the big ones. Everyone knows about More Spirit. Everyone knows about Shagaf and Nyquist and Doug O'Neill and all those. But not a lot of people were looking at a team like Leicester City coming into this league, into this year's Premier League, as a legitimate threat, obviously, as the 5,000 to 1 odds would stand. And just for those of you that are curious, 5,000 to 1, legitimately, if you put 20 pounds over there in the UK on this team to win, you would return 100,000. The equivalent is roughly $29 here in the States, and it would return just over $146,300 on a $29 win wager. So I guess what I'm trying to kind of get at is this the year that we kind of set ourselves up? And I've been saying it for a few weeks now. Maybe Nyquist is just the best horse. Maybe he's got the connections. They know what they're doing. Redhams, Doug O'Neill, they've won the Kentucky Derby before. They've won big races in the past. Obviously, he's undefeated. He hasn't done anything wrong. Bob Baffert, coming off of a Triple Crown campaign, a successful Triple Crown campaign with American Pharoah. He knows what he's doing. You don't have to worry about some of the bigger names, the bigger outfits. But you've got some of these interesting sort of new shooters, and in a year where it doesn't seem like there's anyone that's a standout, and I'm including Nyquist. I don't think he's a standout. I think he's the most talented runner in the field. But you know what? It doesn't mean he's going to win. in a year where there's so many unknowns from a pace standpoint and whatever else it may be, are we kind of setting ourselves up for a Leicester City sort of upset? Now again, Leicester City has not locked it up yet, but they need to win one of their final 3 games, or they need to have the second place team at this stage in the game, Tottenham. They need to slip up as well. So at this stage, it looks like Leicester City is going to come through and they're going to win this thing. Now just to put everything into perspective, again, from our standpoint, from a racing standpoint, yeah, you've got a 50-1 shot in Mind That Bird. You've got a 50-1 shot in Giacomo. Those are long shots, proper long shots in the Kentucky Derby. You go back a little ways, you've got horses like Volpone winning the Breeders' Cup Classic, Arkong way back, I believe that was in '93 when Jerry Bailey rode him at 132-1. Those are our sort of long shots. 5,000-1, process that. That's essentially a 0.02% chance of winning. That's what the bookies put Leicester City at the beginning of the year. In a way, that would be like making a future bet on a horse that's a 2-year-old that has never even raced yet. And we're talking like in July of the year prior. It's just an insane sort of thing to wrap your head around. Just for perspective's sake, prior upset winners in major leagues worldwide. Okay, the 1987 Minnesota Twins, they were 500-1 to win the World Series. And all this information is coming from a Sports Illustrated article. You can look it up online from a few weeks back. The 87 Twins were 500-1 to win the World Series. A long shot by anyone's standards. The 99 Rams, the greatest show on turf, they were 300-1 to win the Super Bowl. That was Kurt Warner and whatnot. They went on and beat the Tennessee Titans. Euro 2004, we'll go back, tie it into soccer or football, however you want to call it. Greece was 152-1 to win Euro 2004. They ultimately went on to do that. And as far as another team, the 1969 Mets, a lot of people here in New York familiar, the Miracle Mets, they were 100-1 to win the World Series, and they ultimately did so in '69. Just, again, trying to put things into perspective. 5,000-1. Something else that's offered at 5,000-1 in books is the discovery of Elvis alive. 5,000-1, they're going to pay you if you find Elvis alive, or they would have paid you 5,000-1 Leicester City at the beginning of the year to win the Premier League. It looks like that's what's probably going to happen. And again, I'm just trying to kind of make the comparison that, you know what, just because all the big names are there and they've got everything ready to go, a Manchester United, a Manchester City, Arsenal, Liverpool, whoever else you want to go, Tottenham even, that doesn't mean that they're a lock. And we look at this year, we have all the big names in the Derby. We have Baffert, we have Pletcher, we have Chad Brown, Kieran McLaughlin, you name it, they're there, Doug O'Neill. Just because they're all there doesn't mean that it's a guarantee that they're going to get the job done. And who knows? Here I have been poo-pooing the chances of a horse like Trojan Nation, who's a maiden, and he's run slow races in Southern California, and he ran a good one last time in the Wood. Maybe he and Paddy Gallagher, they get the job done. He breaks his maiden in the Kentucky Derby. You never know. That's the beauty of this thing. 20 horses are going to go to the post next Saturday, the first Saturday in May. They're going to contest the Kentucky Derby, and it'll be interesting to see how things shake down. Will we have a Leicester City sort of upset, or will we have something a little bit more formful where the class prevails? We'll find out 8 days from now. When we come back from break, we'll talk to the man that's going to call the race, the Kentucky Derby, Travis Stone, the announcer at Churchill Downs. Stay with us here at the Matt Bernier Show on DRF Live.
Say goodbye to your inner caveman. If you're making caveman bets on pick sixes, you could be leaving money on the table. DRF Bets Ticket Maker helps you build more profitable exotic bets and place them with one click. Raise your game with DRF Bets Ticket Maker. Be a samurai with your ROI. DRF Bets Ticket Maker helps you cut out unprofitable exotic bets before they happen and be the master of profits. Raise your game with DRF Bets Ticket Maker, the exotic wagering app.
Breeders' Cup Classic. Private Zone has run a 45 flat half mile and has opened up 2.5 lengths. Private Zone's got the lead close to home and he's all by himself. Private Zone wins the Forgo.
10 after 12 East Coast, 10 after 9 West Coast, the Matt Bernier Show on DRF Live. Everyone's at a fevered pitch at this point. Next Friday is the Kentucky Oaks. Next Saturday is the Kentucky Derby. Let's bring in Travis Stone, the announcer from Churchill Downs. He'll be the one calling the Kentucky Derby next Saturday. Travis, how are you?
Good, doing well. How are you?
Very good. I guess before we dive into all the handicapping and the minutia of the actual race itself, I'm curious, your job obviously is to be the announcer. You've done some work. You've been at Churchill for over a year now. You've done some work at NYRA in the past. Does the Derby itself, do you approach it any differently other than the obvious that there's 20 horses that are going to go? Do you approach it any differently doing your prep work going into it, knowing that you've got to call 20 horses going a mile and a quarter?
Oh, yeah. The extensive prep work. I have flashcards with the silks made. I had a 4x3 or so photo printed of each horse to kind of get familiar with their markings and how they look when an actual race. And I've got about a page on each horse with, notes on how they like to run and some ideas and things to say should certain situations arise. So it's, without a doubt, it's a significant amount of prep work for a 2-minute, session on a microphone. That's for sure.
Is it a situation where you want to make sure you get at least a call of every horse at one point? Because, there are some that are just going to be no-hopers from the beginning of it, but is it kind of the obligation to get at least one call of the entire field?
Yeah, when these owners have a horse that runs the Kentucky Derby, they deserve to hear their horse's name mentioned at least once, and I think that is generally the case in any race, regardless of whether or not it's the Derby. Obviously, getting through 20 in the Derby can be a little bit hairy, but yeah, the first half mile of the call basically is all focused on getting through the entire field and giving everyone a spot in the call and going from there. So yeah, without a doubt.
All right, let's dive into the actual sort of details of the horses that'll be competing in this race. Let's start off with the horse that I think everyone has to start talking about. That's Nyquist. He's undefeated, hasn't done anything wrong. He's going to go in as the favorite. I think first things first, do you have any sort of concerns about his distance limitations, knowing the pedigree, or do you look at it and say, at this stage in the game, he's just the best horse?
I think you said it right. It's hard to knock someone who's never lost, right? He's undefeated, and he's won his races pretty well. He takes his game on the road. He's traveled to a bunch of different racetracks and done so. And it's just really hard to knock that. I think that the distance question is fair for many of them in here. I don't necessarily believe his lead change in the Florida Derby was a representation of his inability to get 10 furlongs. I think there was a few factors at play there. So, I think he's sort of one of those until proven wrong you have to support. But I get it. He's going to be one of the shorter prices in the race. There's 20 of them in there. So, would I ever bet the farm on a horse like Nyquist? No, but I certainly think he's the horse to beat.
Talking about price come post time, where do you ultimately, kind of a gut feel, where do you think he goes off? Is he as low as 3-1, or do you think he goes off a little higher than that?
It's an interesting question. I think he goes off a little bit higher than that because I think the race is a little bit too open to have him be that short. However, his being at Keeneland, I think, is affecting sort of the buzz that he would get if he were at Churchill instead. And I think that's going to allow him to drift up as well. I think ultimately the problem is who else gets money that could sort of knock his price up a little bit. And I think that's the concern, because I think the public is uncertain of who the clear second choice is, because we just haven't heard much about Exaggerator and those types yet.
As far as all the preps themselves are concerned, was there one race in particular, both good and bad, that you looked at and said, that's the race where I think we're going to have the most success long-term or even short-term, talking Derby? And then conversely, was there one prep in particular where you looked at it and said, you can have them all?
That's a great question. I do feel like the California preps have been the best. I thought the Santa Anita Derby was the one prep where you could say, these were legitimate group of horses that probably have some long-term staying power in a race like the Kentucky Derby. And even the race prior to the Santa Anita Derby, when Dancing Candy went wire to wire, I thought that was still the strongest field. And nothing has happened since then that would cause me to change my mind and think otherwise, the San Felipe Santa Anita Derby. So I would stick with those two.
And was there one in particular that you kind of looked at and said, that's not a very strong effort, whether it is? I know a lot of people have been talking about the Wood. They've been talking about the Bluegrass. Is it one of those two that you look at and say, the weakest prep coming into the Derby?
It's an interesting question when you compare the Wood and the Bluegrass. I think the answer, without a doubt, lies between those two races. I think the key difference, though, is the pace in the Wood was supersonic. And so it's hard to totally knock a horse like Outwork when he was right up and on a wicked pace, breaking from the outside, going a mile and an eighth at Aqueduct, and he was still able to hang on for the win. Now, he barely hung on against a maiden, so it's a little bit dicey there. But then you flip to the Bluegrass, and it was just, I think everybody sort of agreed going in it was the weakest of the Derby preps. And I don't necessarily know if anything happened that would change your mind. I mean, there was a bit of a strong pace. The race collapsed. There just wasn't that many good closers in there, and like sort of Brody's Cause and My Man Sam clunked up and got first and second. So that's really a tough question. It's a coin toss. I feel like Outwork probably has more upside, and so I would probably lean toward the Bluegrass as being the weaker of the two. But I think that's a coin flip.
Joined by Travis Stone, track announcer at Churchill Downs. He'll be calling the Kentucky Derby next Saturday here on the Matt Bernier Show. We talk a little bit about the pace, and you were alluding to that fast pace that was set in the Wood. Let's try to transfer that to the Derby next Saturday. Going through all these preps leading up to the Derby itself, it seemed like every one of these races was fast early, slow late. The paces crumbled, and in a way, it was almost like a war of attrition where a lot of these early speeds kind of killed themselves off. Now you look at it, are you expecting we're going to get a similar pace to what we've had the past few years, 47 and change? Or do you look at it and say you've got a couple horses in Dancing Candy and Outwork that are legitimately fast, and they're going to give you a pretty honest go of it early?
I think we're going to be on the more moderate side than the fast side. I think for sure you can expect Dancing Candy to be on the lead. They learned their lesson last time, so I'm sure they've been working with him to sort of ration out that speed a little bit. You add Outwork to the mix, and yes, he was fast in the Wood, but he also drew the outside post. And I think Johnny V is going to have a more patient ride on him. And, they're all going to be concerned about getting 10 furlongs, and that tends to cause a little bit of a grab situation and more of a relaxed type trip. So I wouldn't be shocked to see Outwork sitting a length off Dancing Candy, so to speak, in the early going. And I just don't foresee those two pulling a Palace Malice or a Song and a Prayer type situation. I think the wild card comes into play. Mohaymen has been very eager in his training all week long. If a horse like Mohaymen breaks sharply and just decides to go on with it, and that would really juice it up. But as of right now,
this is a nice. Go ahead.
Sorry, I was just saying, as of right now, I don't see it being a supersonic pace.
No, but this is a good little segue into, I'm going to throw names at you real quick, probably 5 or 6 of them. And the first one I was going to ask you about was Mohaymen. And just right now, your thoughts looking at him saying, you know what, that final race in the Florida Derby obviously wasn't great, but this is a horse that prior to that, many people had at the top of the list. Your thoughts about Mohaymen?
I did not like his Fountain of Youth. I actually loved his Holy Bull. When he won the Holy Bull, I was like, how is anybody going to beat this horse come May? And then I felt like at the end of the Fountain of Youth, he had shown signs of tailing off a little bit, and he was pretty awful last time. Now, there's a lot of Kool-Aid to drink because he has looked fantastic at Churchill Downs. But, I think we've all gone for the Kool-Aid jar once in a while, and sometimes it tastes good. Most of the times it doesn't. So I'm against him in here, but I wouldn't be surprised to see him run a good race because he has been training well. I just don't even know if his good race is good enough.
Thoughts on Bob Baffert's More Spirit?
Well, I mean, how much of a grinder is he? Because grinders don't win the Derby, and he just looks like one. However, Gary Stevens has been on the record just saying to several people that's not how this horse is. He looks like a grinder to those of us that watch races as horse players because of the way he carries his head. He's going to be in that sort of first, third, second flight, and that might be the flight that wins this race. It just depends on how much money he takes because he's Bob Baffert. I think More Spirit has a little bit of a chance. I think he's more live underneath.
We talked about the pace scenario a little bit. Dancing Candy, do you look at it and say the Santa Anita Derby, wet track, much too fast early, he's going to rebound something similar to the San Felipe? Or do you look at it and say, boy, mile and a quarter, he's going to need to come off of a terrible effort? Where do you stand on Dancing Candy?
I actually think he gets a look in here. I sort of take the Palace Malice from his Derby psychotic pace to the Belmont Wire Job. It's sort of a similar filter to this psychotic pace in the Santa Anita Derby. I think if he gets loose in the Kentucky Derby and the pace is not all that strong, I was really impressed with the San Felipe. He's going to offer some value. He's one of the ones that people are going to write off awfully quickly, in my opinion. I actually think he gets a look. He'd be sort of my long shot play, without a doubt.
The way you laid it out is exactly how I'm looking at this horse as well. The Palace Malice sort of trip where the Derby, he went much, much too fast. And you can even say the same thing about a horse like Oxbow in the Preakness. He was very close to that pace, ultimately faded a little bit, and they both came back to win and run good in the Preakness and the Belmont. Shagaf was really the sort of Chad Brown horse that was fancied throughout the majority of this prep season. He hasn't sort of punched himself through that sort of glass ceiling and improved it all. What are your thoughts on Shagaf?
I actually think Shagaf's a miler, to be honest with you. When I watch his races, I feel like I see a horse that makes that nice, strong sort of middle move and kind of weakens a little bit late. I thought he weakened a little bit late in the Gotham, even though he won. Running down Lauban sort of has not panned out to be all that much. Even his return race for the year at Gulfstream, it felt like he was getting a little bit tired late. And wasn't he supposed to win the Wood? I get it that he stopped on the far turn, but they crawled home. And if he truly was much of a horse, wouldn't he have at least threatened for the win there? So I don't know. I generally would go to that side of the camp because I do think he'll be a little bit overbet. Those horses that have the one-word names and have been buzzed all winter long, they always get overbet come Derby.
Exaggerator is a horse coming into the Derby with the highest last out Beyer speed figure of a 103. He was victorious in the slop at Santa Anita and Santa Anita Derby. Do you look at it and say he's a legitimately good horse, and obviously the wet track helped him, but at the same time, he doesn't need to have a wet track to run well?
No, I think Exaggerator looks like a Derby winner, doesn't he? I mean, the way he runs his races, he has a little bit of a push-button type move when needed. I think Kent Desormeaux, when he's on his game, is one of the best riders in the country. He certainly knows how to win the Derby. Without a doubt, Exaggerator is a top 3 win candidate, probably the deserving second choice, and would be my most likely horse should Nyquist not run his race or be a little bit, wanting late going 10. Without it, Exaggerator's good. I think he's a very talented horse.
The final Derby horse we'll talk about before we shift briefly to the Kentucky Oaks. Gunrunner was victorious. He swept both of the big races. He didn't run in the first race down at the fairgrounds this spring and winter season. He's coming into this race really not having done anything wrong. 4 or 5 lifetime. Only loss was at Churchill Downs. Where do you stand on Gunrunner?
He's sort of the wild card in this race. First off, he's got enough speed to be in a forward spot in a race that might be an advantage. He's improved with each consecutive start this year. I get it that he looks like he's a little bit slow on figures, but no matter what figure maker you talk to, everybody is having a hard time fairly assessing the Louisiana Derby. My friend Nick Hammer, who works with Beyer, he even could make the argument that figure could go higher. Brisnet downgraded theirs. I guess it's slow on Thoroughgraph. And, so there's just a lot of gray area around Gunrunner in terms of whether or not he's fast enough. However, the one thing that I haven't read much about is apparently, and I couldn't quite hear it today, he is making a noise while training as of late. And horsemen I respect have noticed it. They have also asked about it, and they're not overly concerned. That's a legitimate question mark. What's going on there? Gunrunner is probably, he's a live chance. Would never pick a horse like him on top, but would he totally surprise you if he won? Absolutely not.
Let's shift our attention real quick while we still have you, Travis, to the Oaks. We don't want to give the fillies any disrespect, but it is one of these scenarios where leading into this, I think everyone was hoping that we would have just an absolute fantastic performance from Songbird. She would stamp herself as not just the best 3-year-old filly, but arguably the best 3-year-old. Unfortunately, she got sick. She's going to miss the race. From a wagering standpoint, it makes it a much more appetizing race if you didn't want to try to take a shot against Songbird. You've got a lot of interesting fillies in here, whether it's a Landover Sea, a Terra Promesa, even a Weep No More, Rachel's Valentina. Is there any one filly in particular that you've got your eye on as a most likely winner and then possibly one that could offer a little bit of value underneath?
Yeah, so I'll tell you what, I was willing to take a chance against Songbird with Rachel's Valentina in the Kentucky Oaks.
Okay.
I think Rachel's very talented, and she's going to be second off the layoff, which is a go-to move for Todd. I thought her return race was very sharp in the Ashland. I think she takes a big step forward, and I wouldn't be surprised if she wins this going away. I think she's that good. The horse that's probably not going to get in, but I wish she would, is Karina Mia. I think she's very talented too, and she ran sneakily good last time out. Unfortunately, with that quarantine situation, she sort of got hosed and kind of fell behind the 8 ball, but sometimes that's how it goes. But yeah, I like Rachel Valentina. I think she's a good filly, and I'm sad that she's not going to get the face-off against Songbird this time around, but hopefully she accounts herself well. And it'd be pretty cool to see a daughter of Rachel Alexandra win the Kentucky Oaks too.
Where do you stand on Catherine Sophia, the filly who it sounded like initially after the Ashland they were going to turn her back to the 8 Bells? We get the defection of Songbird. They call an audible and go back to the Oaks. Do you look at that as a questionable move, or do you think that Catherine Sophia figures in this race as well?
I think she figures. I mean, look, she probably, at the end of the day, come next Friday night, we all probably said, you know what, she is a sort of a one-turn sprinter type. But I think you have to take the chance without the Songbird in here. And who knows, maybe she moved a little bit too early last time. That race, was won by a horse from way behind, so maybe she can relax a little bit more in here. She might be a little bit forgotten at the windows, too, because people are going to assume that she can't go this far. But she's obviously very talented, and I put her right in the mix.
Travis Stone, announcer of Churchill Downs, thanks for giving us a couple of minutes talking about Derby and Oaks. Best of luck tomorrow night on opening night, and then obviously next Friday and Saturday with the big ones. We'll talk to you soon.
Appreciate it, man. Good luck.
All right, thanks, man. We'll take a quick break here on the Matt Bernier Show. When we come back, we're going to dive into checking out last weekend's races that we handicapped. Wasn't one of our banner weekends, but you know what? Happens sometimes. We'll give you a recap of that, and we'll lead into some more races this weekend. Stay tuned.
Say goodbye to your inner caveman. If you're making caveman bets on pick sixes, you could be leaving money on the table. DRF Bets Ticketmaker helps you build more profitable exotic bets and place them with one click. Raise your game with DRF Bets Ticketmaker. Be a samurai with your ROI. DRF Bets Ticketmaker helps you cut out unprofitable exotic bets before they happen and be the master of profits. Raise your game with DRF Bets Ticketmaker, the exotic wagering app.
Breeders' Cup Classic. Private Zone has run a 45 flat half mile and has opened up 2.5 lengths. Private Zone's got the lead close to home and he's all by himself. Private Zone wins the Forgo.
12:28 East Coast, 9:28 West Coast, the Matt Bernier Show on DRF Live. Want to thank Travis Stone, track announcer from Churchill Downs, again for giving us 10 to 15 minutes to talk about the Derby and the Oaks. Some real interesting tidbits. I'm fascinated by the talk of Gunrunner and how he's a bit of a noisy worker. It'll be interesting to see if there's anything that comes of that going forward into the Derby next Saturday afternoon. Before we get into the review of last week's handicapping, went over 3 races last weekend. A couple things on Twitter. Aaron from Louisville, do I consider Creator to be a win candidate in the Kentucky Derby? I always kind of have. I mean, I think he's a good runner. He seems to be peaking at the right time. No matter what you look at, whether you use Byers, whether you use some of the other sort of figs that are out there, Thorograph or any of the other numbers, it seems like this is a horse that's on the improve. And maybe he just needed to kind of figure things out. Early on at Fairgrounds, he just didn't seem to really be getting it done. His most recent efforts, all 3 of them, have been very, very good. I think he comes into this. If he gets the setup, I think he's a legitimate contender to win the Kentucky Derby. Dustin Bartles at USA Dusty. Can I get one of those DRF mugs? I don't know who you talk to about that, but this is pretty good. I don't know if you're a coffee drinker or whatever you want to drink out of it. That's entirely up to you. But I don't know. I don't have a good answer for you. I suppose we can look around and find out. Maybe maybe we do giveaways. Maybe we give out mugs. You watch the show, we give out a thing, you get a mug. We'll talk about it. It's an option. Let's take a look at last weekend's races that we handicapped here on the show. The first of the 3 that we looked at was the Elkhorn from Keeneland. By the way, opening day at Belmont Park is here. Fantastic. That's always a positive. On the sad side, closing day at Keeneland. It is what it is as the seasons change, meets open and close. Elkhorn last Saturday at Keeneland. Kurt Becker turning for home. I thought the most likely winners, the Big Hoss, as a live long shot. I liked a red tie day. Let's see how it played out.
Leading it by 3 lengths. Twilight Eclipse second. Kygan changing lanes toward the outside. To Big Hoss looking for room down toward the inside. To Big Hoss 2 lengths away and coming on. Kygan's there on the outside. Royal Albert Hall running late. Red Tide Day fights on. To Big Hoss has the lead. Royal Albert Hall between horses. Kygan there on the outside. To Big Hoss. Kygan trying. To Big Hoss wins the Dixiana Elkhorn.
Kurt Becker with the call. The Big Hoss going into this, I thought he just really disliked that surface down at Gulfstream Park. He gets to a more lush sort of proper turf course because the turf down at Gulfstream had just turned into basically a highway. It was rock solid. He gets back there, gets the job done. Another dream trip, and I can understand why some people want to say going forward, I don't want him. I would rather have Kagan, who ultimately of the two had a more difficult go of it. I thought Joe Bravo said something very interesting after the race. He said, they're basically the same horse, and it's ultimately going to come down to trip time and time again. Whoever gets the better trip, likely going to get the upper hand. I thought it was a good effort from the Big Hoss. A Red Tide Day, I have no complaints with the way he ran. I lost $50 on the race, and it doesn't really bother me because Gary Stevens did everything in his power to get that horse to victory. I think the distance was a little bit long for him. I think he's a nice, solid front runner. There's going to be a spot for him. It'll be probably in Southern California, probably a little bit shorter, 1.25 miles. I thought a Red Tide Day ran very well there for Richard Baltus. He's an interesting one going forward in those sort of longer races in Southern California. The Charlestown Classic, 3 turns, not quite under the lights, but it was the sort of final race of the day for us here on DRF Live Saturday. It was an interesting field going, and I thought the most likely winner was Imperative. He had won this race 2 years ago, ran incredibly last year in it. And I thought a live long shot was Marvelous going in for Mike Maker coming out of that New Orleans handicap down at the fairgrounds. Take him as they turn from home.
Javier Castellano will come to the top of the stretch in front of the Charlestown Classic. Paige McKinney to confront him, and Donworth all out down the outside trying to get to Stanford. A 1/16 of a mile left to go, and Todd Pletcher and Javier Castellano will strike again. They win the Charlestown Classic, this time with Stanford.
Paul Espinoza Jr. with the call down at Charlestown. Look, Stanford, the interesting thing about Stanford going into it was I didn't know how far ultimately he wanted to go. I think he's much more of a miler, but maybe the track configuration at Charlestown, the 3 turns, was going to prove advantageous for him because it is a little bit of an oddball sort of thing. You're never going to do that again unless you're running the race again next year. And the other thing, too, was he had speed. And it was a race that I guess on paper it didn't look like you were going to have. It wasn't going to be a breakneck pace by any stretch of the imagination, but I at least expected someone else to press him a little bit, Donworth particularly. And again, it seemed like Donworth just didn't get out of the gate, a little bit slow into stride. He was at the back of the pack early on, which I don't think anyone expected to see. And Stanford was allowed to go out there, and that right there is why Javier Castellano is the best rider in the country. Take the initiative. There's so many jockeys that are afraid to go, afraid to use up their gas early on. Javier can sense better than anyone. Is it going a little bit slow? Is it going too fast? We need to back off a little bit. He just times everything right. He really hasn't made a wrong call at any point over the past 2-3 years. I thought it was a very good effort from Stanford, and I thought it was a great ride from Castellano. It'd be interesting to see where that horse ultimately comes back because, again, I don't know that 1 1/8 is really his game. I feel like at a conventional 1 1/8, I don't think he's as good as what we saw there going 3 turns. There's whispers about the Met Mile. I think if you're going to find out if he's top caliber, grade 1 caliber, I think the Met is the place to do it. A 1-turn mile that's probably more in his wheelhouse than trying to go 2 turns in like the Stephen Foster or a race like that. But at the end of the day, I don't know that he's that good, and we'll find out. The jury's still out, however you want to pronounce that, or you know what I'm saying. Imperative, as far as the most likely winner, I just thought he got he didn't get into stride soon enough, I thought. And it was interesting. Mike Smith tried to get him out into the clear down the backside and get into the running a little bit earlier, and it just didn't seem like he fired his same shot. He was coming into it in a little bit of suspect form because his most recent start in the big cap was a little bit lackluster. Mike Watchmaker had alluded to that, and I think there was some validity to it. He didn't really fire his A game. It'll be interesting to see where he ultimately shows up again as well. And as far as Marvelous is concerned, look, he is what he is. This is a horse that was claimed last year at Belmont Park out of 1-turn races. They stretched him out. He's a graded stakes winner at this stage in the game. And look, he doesn't owe them anything. He ran 5th in here. I believe he went off at 9-1. A spot where, again, you took a shot. You're trying to go for the money. $1.25 million is the purse. I can understand why people wanted to go there. So my most likely winner, Imperative, he finished 4th. Live long shots, Marvelous. He finished 5th. Stanford is your winner. The Great Lady M from Los Alamitos was an interesting race and far and away the most frustrating result for me of the weekend. I love the way that a Red Tide Day ran in the Elkhorn, even though I lost You can never be disappointed if a rider does everything in their power to get the job done for you as a wagerer. Gary Stevens did that. And I'm not saying that anyone in the Great Lady N didn't do that. I thought the most likely winner was the Baffert entrant, Fantastic Style. She was coming into this in very good form. She had already won at Los Alamitos in the past, I believe right in this very race last year. And as a live long shot, I thought Mink Surprise coming from Northern California for Hollendorfer was very interesting. She had some good dirt pedigree in there. I believe there was a family member that was related to Turbulent Descent on the dam side, so there was plenty of dirt in there. But we'll talk about why this is a frustrating result after we take a look at the stretch run. Frank Miramonte with the call.
Lost Bus. Finest City is just behind rivals. Dr. Fager's Gal. The whip is out on Ben's Duchess, who's not firing. They're heading to the furlong pole. Fantastic Style. Lost Bus is running another big one. Finest City, and here comes Mink Surprise on the outside. Fantastic Style's going to have to dig in. Finest City surging on the outside, and Finest City cruises to the front under Kent DeSormo to pull off the upset in the Great Lady M.
Yeah, that's about as frustrating as it gets, because if anyone has followed DRF Live on Saturdays for quite some time, or even going back to last year when I will occasionally fill in for Brad Free when he's on vacation doing the Santa Anita or the Southern California analysis, I saw Finest City run last year before going into an allowance race, and I thought, this is a legitimately good filly. And I had even written in the analysis that the La Brea down the road seemed like a logical target for her as a 3-year-old. Ultimately, they go to the La Brea. She doesn't fire, but she had a tough trip. She was hung very wide. Gary Stevens was up. Kind of in a darned if you do, darned if you don't situation. She comes back next time out, and I was licking my chops saying, this is the time. This is it. And somehow she lost the Lost Bus at 10-1. And I said, I don't know. That's a tough pill for me to swallow. I don't know that I can back you after that. You're supposed to beat Lost Bus. Then she kind of rattled off a couple of poor efforts in a row, 75, 78 buyers. And I just said, look, maybe she's just not that good. Maybe I was wrong. She fooled me in a big way. And then she goes and does that at 10-1 when I'm off. Again, this is a game that'll drive you nuts. We love it, but it'll drive you nuts from time to time with horses that you think are good, that you don't think are good, that end up doing things that kind of counteract whatever your play is. It was a frustrating result for me because I've thought Finest City for a while was good. Now I don't know where she is, because Los Alamitos can be a little bit of a quirky surface, and some horses love it, some horses hate it. Fantastic Style, I thought she ran a very good race. She was up early on the pace. She was pressed every step of the way. Don't hold this race against her. She's a talented filly. She'll move back on that. And Mink Surprise, she ran 4th in the spot. I think ultimately she's probably just better on either a synthetic surface or against a little bit lesser competition. Maybe she doesn't quite class up, because she put in a little bit of a run, but she flattened out down the lane at Los Alamitos. So all things considered, last weekend's handicapping, mixed bag, but probably leaning toward not so good compared to what we've had in the past. Hopefully the 3 races we go over after we come back from break are going to be better. The Elusive Quality from Belmont Park, the California Chrome Stakes from Los Alamitos, the San Francisco Mile from Golden Gate. Stay with us on the Matt Bernier Show.
Breeders' Cup Classic. Private Zone has run a 45 flat half mile and has opened up 2.5 lengths. Private Zone's got the lead close to home, and he's all by himself. Private Zone wins the Forgo.
Say goodbye to your inner caveman. If If you're making caveman bets on pick sixes, you could be leaving money on the table. DRF Bets Ticketmaker helps you build more profitable exotic bets and place them with one click. Raise your game with DRF Bets Ticketmaker. Be a samurai with your ROI. DRF Bets Ticketmaker helps you cut out unprofitable exotic bets before they happen and be the master of profits. Raise your game with DRF Bets Ticketmaker, the exotic wagering app.
1240 East Coast, 940 West Coast, the Matt Bernier Show on DRF Live. Let's dive into some races that we'll go over this weekend. You'll only have one of these on DRF Live tomorrow starting at 3 Eastern with Dan Illman, Mike Beer, and myself. Unfortunately, the two California races we're going to go over, they just start so late. And this is something to kind of give you a heads up going forward. Next week doesn't count because it's the Oaks and the Derby. We'll be on both Friday and Saturday on DRF Live. The following week, though, the week between the Derby and the Preakness, it seems like, I believe it's tentatively okayed. We're going to be bumping the DRF Live schedule back on Saturdays from 3 to 7 to 4 to 8, simply because now with daylight savings and all this other stuff, and California seems to have pushed back their post times, we need to get some of their better racing in. So this week, unfortunately, we won't get two of them, but we got you covered here on this show. Let's start off with the one race that you will see on DRF Live tomorrow. That's the Elusive Quality from Belmont Park. Again, opening day at Belmont today. It's nice to be back at the big old mile and a half circle or oval, whatever you'd like to call it. So this is a 7 furlong turf race. We've got a lot of horses in here that are listed on the also eligible list. Or I'm sorry, on the main track only list, I should say. And I don't want to say a lot of them. Ready for Rye is an MTO. As long as it stays on the turf, he'll be out. And as well as a horse drawn toward the outside, the 11, I believe, Stallwalking Dude, is also going to be a main track only. The interesting thing about this race, you've got some quality in here for a $100,000 stakes race, non-graded event. 7 furlongs for me is the ultimate sort of conundrum for a couple of these runners, because 7 probably works better for some horses than it does others. Others probably prefer the turf sprint in the 5, 5.5 range, maybe even 6. And that's why I'm going to call the number 5 Green Mask, the morning line favorite at 2 to 1 on Eric Donovan's morning line, a vulnerable favorite. Let's take a look at his run from the Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint. This was back at Keeneland. You're going to see him in the green and white silks, about 4 or 5 paths off the far turn, mid-pack. He's going to come with a good run in this spot. The reason I don't have a problem with this race at all. I don't have a problem whatsoever. I thought it was actually a very good effort. He's just angling to the outside. He's next to Bobby's Kitten right now, number 7. He's going to end up finishing pretty well. The concern I have is this was at 5.5 furlongs. And most of his success, I know he's won at 7 furlongs at Belmont in the past. It was against much inferior competition. He went out to a mile. That showed a little bit testing for him, and he couldn't get the job done. Green Mask is a very talented runner, always has always been a little bit quirky for Wesley Ward. May not be the most professional. It seems like he started to get a little bit better as he's gotten older. My concern, though, is the distance. I just don't think 7 is really what he wants to do, whereas some other horses in here, I think 7 hits him right between the eyes. Green Mask, I think, can be a player going forward, but I wonder if he's better suited 5, 5.5 furlongs sprinting on the turf. As a live long shot, and this I've got to kind of throw in a little bit of an asterisk or a disclaimer saying, at 12 to 1 on the morning line, I think a lot, the number 3 horse, is a live long shot. I don't think we're going to get 12 to 1. I have a sneaky feeling he's going to get hammered. This is a horse that was in Bill Mott's barn, has since been transferred over to Chad Brown's. Now, Chad Brown, it's a very interesting stat, and I have it right here. I'll pull it up for us. Chad Brown, over the past 5 years, first time after a trainer switch in turf sprints, is 1 for 15. But 7 of them have hit the board, so they do run, and I'm going to just chalk that up to a little bit of bad luck. You want to use the positive formulator fact. Chad Brown past 3 years turf route to sprint at Belmont Park, 10 for 22 with 18 in the money finishes, a 405 ROI. And as anyone that pays attention to the daily racing form, you have all of your stats down in the bottom, or if you use formulator, you can customize things. Chad Brown route to sprint is money. That is money in the bank. I believe it's a positive flat ROI. I think a lot is a very interesting runner. Again, I'm listing him as a live long shot. I made him 6 to 1, and I think he's probably going to be in that 6, 8 to 1 range. I thought his race in the Tampa Bay was okay. I've always felt like he's got some distance limitations. He's better suited at 7 furlongs at Belmont, and the only other time he's tried that, I understand it was against inferior competition. You go back to that race last May in the Paradise Creek, he pounded that field. 7 furlongs, 1-turn sprint. That's what he wants. He gets back to it. I like a lot the number 3 in the Elusive Quality tomorrow at Belmont Park. Let's transfer over to the California Chrome Stakes. That's going to be going on at Los Alamitos Racecourse tomorrow afternoon. Again, we won't be on, but there is a full preview up on the site, drf.com/videos. Let's take a look at that entry card if we could. I think it's a very interesting field. You've got 9 that are scheduled to go in this spot. Uncle Lino, to me, is the most likely winner. He's the second choice. He's not the morning line favorite. The morning line favorite is the number 5, Malibu Sunset, for Bob Baffert. That's a horse that has had so much hype and talk around him ever since he showed up from Wayne Catalano's barn. He broke his maiden down at the fairgrounds. They shipped him out to Southern California, gave him to Baffert. Look, did very well first time against winners, going 2 turns, looked the part. Flavian Pratt was up, never turned a hair. The problem was that race has come back awful. It's been a terrible, terrible field that he beat, and I just want to make him prove it to me again at a quirky surface. Not all horses love Los Alamitos, so I kind of want to take a little shot against him. I don't think he's the most likely winner. I think the most likely winner is Uncle Lino. I think there's a ton of ability here. He just hasn't kind of turned the corner yet. He's got multiple Beyer speed figures that are good enough to get the job done in this spot, and I just look at it and say, if he can mature a little bit and get a little bit better, a little sharper, I think he's far and away the most likely winner, and I think he could be a player down the road. I don't think he's going to be a distance sort of horse. I think he may be a good 1-turn, 7 furlong, maybe a miler. I believe that they've even kicked the tires already, talking about the King's Bishop as their sort of summer goal. So that'll be interesting to see if Gary Sherlock and company go that direction and they're looking at a race like the King's Bishop. I think the most likely winner tomorrow in the California Chrome Stakes is the number 8, Uncle Lino. As far as a live long shot is concerned, there are so many things that come together for this one. I like the number 6, Michigas. Michigas goes out for Art Sherman. Art Sherman is the trainer of California Chrome. California Chrome is stabled at Los Alamitos. This race is happening at Los Alamitos. I just think there's, if you want to call it synergy, you want to call so many things just coming together. But if I'm looking at it strictly from the paper standpoint and handicapping the race, there's going to be a lot of speed signed on early on. I think we're going to have a lively pace. I think this is a horse that his most recent start is much better than it looks on paper. He didn't have the cleanest of trips. He had to check a couple times on the far turn. Finally found that little seam down at the rail and kicked on strong. That was a very good effort. He's 8-1 on the morning line. I think he's a very fair play at that number at 8-1. I made him 6-1 and won't be surprised if he goes off north of that, simply because I think 2 or 3 horses in here are going to take a ton of money. I like, as a live long shot, the number 6, Michigas, in the California Chrome Stakes. Let's transfer to Northern California, the San Francisco Mile. It's a grade 3, $100,000 is the purse. I think the most likely winner in the race is the number 12, Bala Bali. He ships up from Southern California for Dick Mandela. The blinkers go on. It's an interesting move because Mandela doesn't normally do that first time in a graded stakes event. Bala Bali, in his most recent start in the Kilroy Mile, I liked him in there, and I thought he ran okay, finished an even 3rd. He didn't seem to take the turns very well. It seemed like he was a little bit of a problem child, which he hasn't been in the past. So it's interesting to see. Maybe Mandela thinks he's lacking a little bit of focus, a little bit of, getting into the race, and maybe that the blinkers going on, that'll keep him sharper, and he'll take the turns a little bit better. I think he's the most likely winner at 2-1. One of my all-time favorite horses is also in this race, horse drawn just was outside the 13, Gabriel Charles. I don't look at him as the most likely winner, and I can't use him as a live long shot. I'll be interested to see. I think he'll be better off second off the bench for Jeff Mullins. But as far as a live long shot is concerned, and it's the horse that I picked on top in this race, that's the 5, Montego Bay. 12-1 morning line. I thought each of his 2 most recent starts, albeit against much weaker competition in straight claiming events, I thought they were both very good. He packs a really nice late kick. Drayden Van Dyke makes the trip up for Neil Drysdale. I like the number 5, Montego Bay, as a live long shot in San Francisco Mile. So let's just wrap it all up right here. Elusive Quality, vulnerable favorite, Green Mask, live long shot, a lot. California Chrome Stakes, most likely winner, the 8, Uncle Lino. Live long shot, the 6, Michigas. San Francisco Mile, most likely winner, the 12, Bala Bali. Live long shot, the 5, Montego Bay. We'll check back next week when we go into our show leading into the Kentucky Oaks, see how we did with those races. So we'll take a quick commercial break here on the Matt Bernier Show. Returning for home. When we come back, we'll give you a weekend preview as far as tournaments, DRF Live is concerned, a little video, and we'll give you the results of that little poll I threw up on my Twitter at Bernier_Matt about the Beyer speed figure in the Kentucky Derby. Stay with us.
Does your online wagering platform want you to win? If they did, wouldn't they help you win? At DRF Bets, we're all about raising your game. That's why we give our players the data, tools, and know-how that no other service can. DRF Bets is more than a place to wager. It's a platform to help you play better and win more. Brought to you by the folks who love racing as much as you do.
Cup Classic. Private Zone has run a 45 flat half mile and has opened up 2.5 lengths. Private Zone's got the lead close to home and he's all by himself. Private Zone wins the Forgo.
Say goodbye to your inner caveman. If you're making caveman bets on pick sixes, you could be leaving money on the table. DRF Bets Ticketmaker helps you build more profitable exotic bets and place them with one click. Raise your game with DRF Bets Ticketmaker. Be a samurai with your ROI. DRF Bets Ticketmaker helps you cut out unprofitable exotic bets before they happen and be the master of profits. Raise your game with DRF Bets Ticketmaker, the exotic wagering app.
12:51 on the East Coast, 9:51 on the West Coast. The Matt Bernier Show, DRF Live. I'm here in the DRF studio, and I thought I just heard a baby crying. I don't know if we don't have anyone that young that works here, but we'll find out. I don't know when I go outside and see what's going on. Let's take a look at what we've got to come this weekend. I don't know if it's officially launched yet, but DRF Tournaments is essentially here. Now, all of you are familiar with NHCQualify.com, BCQualify.com, DRFQualify.com. Those are all being consolidated into one spot. It's going to be called DRF Tournaments. Tournaments.drf.com. I don't know if this weekend is the kickoff or next weekend, but it's all coming together. You can check it out for yourself, tournaments.drf.com. If for some reason it's not officially launched yet, you still have the other three that you can go on, take a look and see what there is to offer. NHCQualify.com, that's where you'll find your entries and your tournaments to get into the National Handicapping Championship. BCQualify.com, that's where you'll go to try to get into the Breeders' Cup Betting Challenge, which will be back out at Santa Anita this year, as well as the satellite sites. And then DRFQualify.com, that's usually any sort of combination of things. We have a Belmont contest coming up where you'll be playing a Belmont Stakes Day, $10,000 event, I believe. Monmouth Park has some events on there. Santa Anita has had them in the past, Gulfstream as well. So you're going to want to check those out. Again, if it's not live yet, it will be. DRF Tournaments, tournaments.drf.com. And if for some reason it's not, NHCQualify.com, BCQualify.com, DRFQualify.com, that's where you're going to want to go in case tournaments.drf.com is not launched yet. Let's take a look, throw up our slate for tomorrow here on DRF Live, starting at 3 Eastern. Dan Illman, Mike Beer, they'll bring you in. Boy, it's nice to see Belmont Park back up there. They'll bring you through about the first half of the card, and then Beer and I will switch spots. Illman will stick around. We'll bring you through a couple final races at Los Alamitos, leading in to the races that come after we get off air, where you'll have the California Chrome Stakes, you'll have the San Francisco Mile from Golden Gate. Those are both races that you're going to want to stay tuned to DRF Live no matter what. And again, for those of you that are unfamiliar with how this thing works, this video player that you're watching right here, where you see in my ugly mug, this is where we'll all be tomorrow, the three of us, going over the races from 3 to 7. But below us is the news feed, where you have all the latest updates from all of our great writers, reporters, and handicappers. That's part of a DRF Plus subscription. There's all sorts of good deals. You go to drf.com/plus to see what there is to offer. There's a nice little banner for you. Use the code SPRINGTV. See what we've got for you, drf.com/plus. Let's take a look at that poll that I threw up. I threw up a poll earlier in the week, just simply to test the waters and see what we've got. What Beyer speed figure is the winner of the Kentucky Derby going to earn? Now, we had, I believe, 415 votes, so for those of you that voted, good on you, kudos, thank you for doing that. I had somebody giving me a hard time also saying, oh, you're an idiot, you're not looking back at past results, it's very broad, there's not enough. Stop. In the most recent years, the Beyer speed figure, the winning number for the Derby, has not been that high. So don't tell me that, oh, Street Sense with his 108 or any, stop, that's nonsense. These are the numbers that you want to look at, and clearly the people kind of queued in on 99 to 101, 44% out of 415 votes. I think that's a pretty good sample size. I got to be honest with you, the way that things have gone this year leading up to the Derby, I think that's probably a pretty good guess. I mean, we're not dealing with the fastest 3-year-olds at this stage in the game that we've ever seen. We're also not dealing with the slowest. They may be slow a little bit, but that doesn't mean that they can't improve at some point. But it seems like if you figure Exaggerator or in that 103 in the Santa Anita Derby, if you think, even if he runs the same number, I think he's a very, very likely win candidate with a 103. I don't think he's going to run a 103. I think the winning number is probably going to be right about 100. And then going forward, I'm sure they'll try to move up. But I think it's an interesting thing to just take a look at and test the water, test the temperature. I'll probably throw up a poll again next week, too. What it is, we'll find out, but it'll be Derby related as well. So it'll be interesting to see how things go. I appreciate all of you that voted in that little poll. Right, again, about 415 people. It seems like the majority like to think that the number will be between 99 and 101. And also, 102 and up got a fair amount, but it seems like really that sweet spot is between 99 and 101. For those of you that are new to the show, we usually wrap everything up with a little bit of a video, an odd video, fun, random. Doesn't have to be racing related, it can be, but I saw this one. My girlfriend works for USA Today Sports, and they have their site called For the Win. And you can go through there, and there's all sorts of just fun, good stuff on there. And I stumbled across this thing. Now, Mike, Claudio, producer, do we have audio with this as well? No audio, so I'll talk over it. If you cue it up, this is at a soccer game in the middle of the field, the pitch, if you will. A very soccer-centric show today. Look at this guy. He is jacked up. And clearly, one more time, can we get this again? He's just, you know, I'm an animal guy. I like dogs. I've had a dog my entire life. This is a dog in a nutshell. He's happy. He doesn't realize that he's totally interrupting everything. But at the same time, he's happy. He just wants to say, he wants to get involved. He just wants a piece of the action, like everyone does. So I thought that was a funny little video there to throw in. The dog interrupting the soccer bookends. Who knew? Horse racing show bookends talking about soccer. Interesting way to wrap things up. Before we go, we're going to throw it ultimately to the formulator race today for Friday here. That's the Elkhorn, not the Elkhorn. What is it? The Elkhorn was last weekend. Mike, what is today's race? Do we know? It's the Bewitch. It's the Bewitch. You don't even have to look. It's the Bewitch. It's the Philly version of the Elkhorn. Illman and I did a preview for that the other day. We'll throw it to that in a minute. But just want to give you the heads up. Next week, Friday, we're going to be on starting probably with this show at noontime. I don't know if it's going to be a half-hour show or an hour-long show, but it's going to be basically summarizing the Kentucky Oaks and the Kentucky Derby. After we're done, we'll have a little bit of a break, and then all of us will come back. Me, Illman, and Beer, we'll bring it into you, and we'll give you through all the stakes races at Churchill Downs on Friday afternoon, leading right through the Kentucky Oaks. And then Saturday, you're going to want to stay tuned all day to DRF Live. We'll be on much earlier than we normally are. We'll bring you through the entire day at Churchill Downs, culminating in the Kentucky Derby, the Run for the Roses, on the first Saturday in May. Those of you watching on DRF Live, thank you. Those of you watching and listening on the podcast, YouTube, SoundCloud, DRF.com, thank you as well. If you want to follow me on Twitter, send me hate mail, send me whatever you want, at Bernier_Matt. I appreciate you watching. Until next week, best of luck this weekend, and let's throw it to the Friday Formulator race of the day. It's the Bewitched from closing day at Keeneland. Best of luck.